Well done, those of you who made it here, turning your backs on the sunshine and resort delights of Sharm el-Sheikh to be here at Park Village. I think that was noble through the grey, damp streets of London on a strike-ridden day. Well done, and hello to everybody at home as well. But of course, Park Village, I mean, just think of the dramatic, creative, theatrical film that's been made in this studio. And you've got me. But you've got Konrad as well, so it's okay. It's okay. We've got the two of us, because we are getting down to the unglamorous, or starting with the unglamorous end of the Ad Net Zero program here with Action 1, which, as Geeta said, is about getting your house in order, because sustainability, like charity, begins at home. And that means getting our act together as ad businesses in our own rights, doing the things we need to do to get on the path we have to be on. And getting our house in order is really about doing the things that we have immediate control and the ability to change. It's about those operational emissions, as we've called them, that create the immediate carbon footprint of a business like an agency, a production company, ad tech, media agency, whichever you like, that's really in the advertising business. That's the emissions from our offices, it's those caused by people when at work, and of course by work-related travel of all sorts. And those are the things which we set out to measure through our members' reported data in Action 1, and they are things which we expect all Ad Net Zero members to measure, to report on, and so that they can act on them. And we need our own businesses, ad businesses, to get their act together, if you like, and demonstrate that they're on the path, and as Kate described it, a thoughtful, rigorous, science-based approach and path toward net zero, because that's the path we have to be on. And it's not because those operational emissions are the biggest, compared to the production work that we do, the media, as we've been hearing about, that we buy, let alone the consumer behaviors that we influence, the things we can take some responsibility for go well beyond this. But this is the bullseye, if you like, at the heart of that bigger target. And without getting our own businesses sorted, I don't think we're in a great position to ask our partners, suppliers, clients up and down the advertising supply chain to do their bit. And that, of course, means making some changes, helping our people make some changes to their behaviors, confronting some challenges in doing so, and being rigorous about the approaches that we take. And those are kind of quite difficult things that, not surprisingly, us weak, frail human beings, oh, thank you. We can already get on with a slide in a minute. Frail human beings tend to try to avoid, but they're things we need to do, and they're things that we can do. These are things you've only just seen some fantastic examples of companies doing. They're things that Ad Net Zero members are already pioneering and doing, and many are on the path. So we're going to hear a bit more in detail about that. But how are we getting on so far? Oh, gone green. The story so far then, and really, we've been living in extraordinary times, as has often been said, so that the 2 years of data that we've got, 20 and 21, are 2 years of massive change to the world of work. And of course, that's had an impact on the emissions of companies like ours. Think international travel over those 2 years. Think commuting. Think empty offices. Think Zoom calls. Not surprisingly, radical effect. But there is real progress being made through all of that. Not only, as has been mentioned, more members in a position to report data, more members within Ad Net Zero, and therefore aligned with this commitment to produce, to think, to measure, to report. But our first international group from Ireland, and they got off to a flying start with presenting their data. Also, simply more data. Up to 35 UK members have had net zero in the past year, considerable growth from before. And of course, some of those are the big holding companies who have multitude of smaller operations underneath that umbrella. So we're covering a wider expanse than the sheer number perhaps suggests. There's evidence of a wider understanding, shared understanding of the nature of the issue, the challenges that people are facing, the priorities they should set, and the things that they can do. And we're going to come back to the guide, the Essentials Guide, and to some training opportunities later on. But the spreading of the word, if you like, and the spreading of those commitments is very real. And most importantly, there is the evidence of more action. You're going to see more of that in a minute, but businesses adopting the sort of policies and practices that you've just been hearing about. So there is real progress, and it's encouraging, and it's great to see, and we need a lot more of it, because there's always a but in here somewhere, and the but is we've still got a way to go. I mean, the picture that we've got and can show of the industry, of course, is a very partial one. Add net zero members, those add net zero members in a position to measure, those add net zero members prepared to report on what they've been doing. These are the best of the best, perhaps. So we can't necessarily pretend that this is really a picture of the whole of the advertising industry, and that's what we need to get. We need to gather more data from more companies, because everybody pretty much is in ad net zero, and we need to see that data. There's clearly a lot more to do, but again, it's stuff that you readily can do. This is the stuff under our management control to make the differences that we must make. So I'm going to hand over to the man who knows, to Konrad now, to take us through the data and show what's really going on.
Thanks, James.
So,
I'm going to head to the next slide. So I'm just going to carry on with the story so far, and this just gives you an indication of the data that we've been collecting over the 2 years. On the left-hand side with the pie chart, you can see the spread of organizations where we're accepting data. Of course, the vast majority are coming from agencies, but you see some media, trade association and production companies. And advertisers are not eligible for this program per se, and hence they're missing from this. But we can see here from 2020 to 2021, there's about a 40% increase in submissions. We've had some companies which submitted for last year for 2020 data, didn't submit for this year, which is unfortunate, but we've got more companies submitting. So at the 35 submission mark, we're roughly about 50% of the eligible population within the AdNet supporter network. And the other great thing this year is welcoming data from Ireland. So Ireland has been signed up onto this program, and we've had 22 submissions from them. So that's great. The other thing which I would say about this year, it's been about new technology, new integration, more automation, which has improved the process a lot, which I think is a lot more accessible. But it also delivers a much more scalable system, which is really important as we look to then expand this program globally and perhaps welcoming other countries onto this program. So the next part of this presentation, I'm just going to run through emissions breakdown and insights analysis. I'm going to blind you with lots of data. It's okay, but I'm going to use some infographics, and I know everyone loves infographics. So here's the big reveal. So this is this year's submissions reporting on 2021 data. You can see the breakdown by country and by scope, total footprint and normalized total footprint. So you've got the scope 1, 2, and 3. For people that want a bit of an explanation, the way I like to think about scope 1 is emissions or things that you're burning that you have control of. Scope 2, you're paying someone to burn it on your behalf, so it's your electricity. And scope 3 is basically your supply chain, which is someone else's 1 and 2 on there. So that's a kind of rule of thumb that I have in my mind to remind me what these scopes actually mean. But I also want to focus a little bit on the normalized total footprint, because this is an important metric. Now, everyone's businesses is very different. They have very different business models, and we're trying to do our best to actually create a apples-to-apples comparison. So the best way to do that is this particular metric, FTE, full-time equivalent. So we break it down per person. We have another metric, which is also turnover, but we don't have that figure there at the moment. But the interesting thing is, I think it's quite evident that Ireland will be smaller. Of course, it's a slightly smaller market. The overall volume will be less. The UK, of course, will be a lot larger. But anyone from the UK and representing UK companies will be pleased to see that you have a slightly lower per FTE footprint compared to Ireland. Now, why is that? And if you look at the two bar charts here, the most obvious thing really is the scope 2, which is the red bar in those bar charts. Now, what we've put this down to is actually companies actually taking less flights, which we noticed. So I've actually ran some of the numbers. So in 2020 data, the companies that submitted flight data, there's about 17 companies in total, roughly worked out 230 flights per company, if you average per company. Now, 2021 data revealed that we had about 25 companies that submitted flight data. We had to take one out because it was kind of given to us in a non-standard format. But then if you then average that across the 24, it works out to about 150 flights. So it seems like we're taking less flights. Now, again, this is only 2 years' worth of data. It doesn't prove anything. Hopefully, when we see year 3, year 4, we can then point to actual embedded changes or trends. So here it gives you the breakdown in terms of like percentage in the UK and Ireland, where these emissions are actually coming from. The interesting thing is you can see the UK, it's quite a lot from business travel, and Ireland, location-wise, has a lot less, has a lot more in terms of the commuting and working from home segment on there. I should say that those who participated in this Action 1 program, they submitted data, basically data regarding energy usage, that's gas and electric, paper consumption, water consumption, business travel, so that's covering air, rail and road, and waste. But for 2021 data, we also included this commuting and working home data as well as hotel stays. Now, the information that we collected from working home and commuting was very much kind of model data. So we weren't asking very intrusive questions to your individual employees on how they were getting to work, but kind of using general information and then mapping that against national statistics. So what's missing from here is procurement from other goods and services, so food, drink, furniture, and things like that, and data from like off-site production or any digital footprints from there. So when we're calculating these things, we're actually using a carbon factor. So the information that you provide, we then find the appropriate carbon factor to give this information. So if you remove the commuting and working from home, you'll see, particularly from the UK, business travel is probably one of the largest, as well as electricity. And brief conversations from our Irish counterparts, I do know that last year they actually didn't take that many flights, so it'll be interesting to see what happens next year. So taking those numbers, we've basically extrapolated this across ad agency industry. So if you imagine this is the estimated footprint for the UK ad industry and the Irish ad industry. Of course, in 2020, that only covers UK because we only had UK on board. So 2021, we have UK and Ireland on there, which pretty much kind of reflects the previous slides of data on which I went through before. So here you can see UK-based agencies' carbon emissions have decreased at roughly about 7.2% from 2020 to 21. And you can see actually from that it's gone from 0.97 to 0.90. And if you remember, there was an earlier report that was produced, I think about 2 years ago now. We actually did a rough estimate and roughly estimated that figure was about 3.5. So things seem to have drastically dropped, which is great news. As James pointed out earlier, some of these are also being affected by COVID and affecting the way we've worked. So again, looking for 22 data, hopefully we can see if any of these changes have become embedded. So on to insights analysis. The surprising thing with the data that we receive, what we've seen is there's only 35% of both Irish and UK companies are using 100% renewable sources. Now, from the UK perspective, that's quite good because in 2020, what we recorded was roughly about 4% of the companies that submitted data were using 100% renewable. That's now gone up to about 16 out of 35. And for Ireland, it's roughly about 5 out of 22, so roughly about 20%. So things seem to be moving on there, but one thing I would recommend, and actually looking into your own energy usage and supplies, is actually just to go and find 100% renewable. It's kind of a no-brainer, given that prices of electricity has gone up. You've got the war in Ukraine, etc., the cost of living crisis. And if you can go buy electricity from certified renewable suppliers. And if you can, and if you have access to that, why not build capacity on site, putting some solar panels on your buildings too. So another bit of analysis that we did, we looked at some of the flights that were submitted to us, and this is the reason why we're asking for granular data here, is to look at and actually find little patterns like this. So we did a bit of analysis on flights, which basically took up to about 8 hours. And you can see the breakdown there. So here, 76% majority is economy, and you can see the rest of the breakdown there. Now, the reason why we focus on 8 hours is because it's probably like the limit of where people are happy to sit economy class. And so if you run the calculations and say, if you had a flight policy which basically said 6 hours and above you're entitled to business class, and actually change that to say 8 hours, we ran the calculations to see what that would give. And what we found was there's potentially 1,000 tons of carbon dioxide being saved from that if you were to make a little small change like that. Now, if you imagine, and if you think in conceptual terms, one tree can absorb about 26 kilograms of carbon dioxide per year. Roughly, you'd have about 500 in 1 hectare. That's 85 hectares worth of forest. And any football fans amongst you, that's about 137 football pitches. That's quite a lot from a small change to a travel policy. And I think it's just a case of maybe learning to be a little bit uncomfortable in certain of these things for the greater good of the environment. So, insights analysis, areas for reduction. I've mentioned about the transition to 100% renewable energy providers. I think this is generally an easier win, and it'd be great if we can focus on these things like Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, which we can get closer to zero, and then spend a lot more time on the harder stuff, which is really getting a grip on Scope 3. There's some kind of other things which people can look into, and this is not only just relevant to your office, but those employees that are working in the home as well, having smart meters installed, smart thermostats. Particularly with smart thermostats, I mean, I have one at home. You can actually change and actually install multiple smart thermostats to create microclimates in your house. So therefore, you're not then heating up the entire home. So there's a lot of these techniques which people can look at to reduce your carbon footprint. As I mentioned before, review your air travel policy. Is it right? Can we do better on these things? We've got the Ad Net Zero Essentials Guide, which actually has a very useful decision tree on there, and actually deciding whether it's right to travel. And I know in some cases it's really important that you have to, but where it's not necessary, do think about it where you really need to. Can a Zoom call replace that? Use tools like Google Flights. And I don't know how many in the audience actually are aware of Google Flights. It's a great way to look up the actual carbon emissions for that flight. So you can look at the emissions as well as the price and take that into consideration when you're choosing your flights. Again, choose sustainable hotels or hotel chains which have a credible sustainability policy. Just moving on to lessons learned from the data collection that we've received so far. Of course, we'll continue to refine the data collection to make it easier for people to submit data. We will freeze data collection for 2 years, so we're not going to be adding new data elements on this. I know the needs for people to have sort of stable requirements, to give them a bit of time to go and make the necessary developments, changes to collect that data. We still have aims to create a fully scalable system that can be rolled out internationally. However, I have to say, some of the data that we're receiving is still patchy in some areas. Some AdNet Zero supporters are struggling to accurately track data without sufficient granularity. And I know those who are located in shared office spaces, many tenants are struggling to get accurate data from their landlords. So these are the kind of pressure points which people can look at to improve on getting that data. So I'm going to head back and hand over to James for the summary.
Yep, well, there you have it, the data to date. There's not enough of it. We need more, and I think we will be getting that as more and more AdNet Zero members join in and get used to reporting as well as taking action. But did we skip a couple of slides there by mistake? They ain't there. Not to worry. Okay. Finish off with just a couple of things. How can AdNet Zero help you get your house in order? Because as we've seen, there are very practical things that can be done. They're under the control of management, and they are things that can be done quite swiftly, as the COVID crisis frankly proved, and has made a lot of the difference that we've been able to keep going with, and good practice that we've been able to maintain. But there are two particular resources under the Action 1 umbrella which I should draw your attention to. One is the Essentials Guide, as Konrad mentioned, updated, refreshed, and available to download as of today, which has got all sorts of good practical stuff in it, examples, insights, tips from people who've done it, and a 10-point guide to doing it yourselves for ad businesses. And the other, of course, is the AdNet Zero training program through the IPA's CPD setup. There is a very comprehensive and interactive online training course, which a lot of members have taken advantage of. There's been more than 1,000 people through it only recently. And I was going to show you a couple of lovely quotes that we have got from users, which just emphasize the point that the training is for everyone. It's not just for people engaged in sustainability. It's for creative people, it's for planners, it's for anyone client-facing. It's to make sure that all of our people understand, have opened their minds to, have taken on board, and feel that they are capable and competent to help make the difference that we can make. And if we do it ourselves, then we can get the whole of the advertising world to do it with us. And I'll leave you just with that thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. Can I ask you to take a seat? Because we do have a question that has come in, and we've just got a little bit of time for both you and Konrad. Some, really practical advice, really, about where you could get started. And one of the questions that has just come through is around that travel element that you highlighted, Konrad. We've got a question. What specific elements of premium economy, business, first class, etc., contribute to the biggest impact? They just want to understand, really, to get a sense of what aspects make the biggest impact. I don't know who would like to take that.
Well, the very simple thing which has been evident from the very beginning is turn right when you get on board that plane. And that's if you have to get on board the plane in the first place. And as Konrad said, there's a decision tree, a travel policy decision tree, which was adopted by one of our members and is in the guide, which can just help people make that decision, or have your companies impose the kind of travel policy that will expect and demand people make the decision, do I need to go? And if I need to go, how can I best go? But, Konrad.
Yeah, when it comes to flights, I mean, obviously, you just got that one plane, and people may think, well, what's the difference? If we're still taking that plane's still flying. The key thing is the area that you're occupying within that plane, and the more people you have there, the more efficient that plane becomes. Now, if you think about, say, first class, there's a huge amount. If you ever got off the disembark, and airlines deliberately get you to go through that area to see how fantastic and how luxurious it is. But you'll see the comparison in terms of the space you have for premium, business, first class, and then on top of that, the services that are given. So obviously you'll get, if you're flying first class, you'll get onboard champagne and things like that. So what's given there, it does contribute to that. So if you must fly, best practice, and if you really care about the environment, is to opt for economy. And I've flown economy for flights beyond 8 hours. It's uncomfortable, but it's all right. I get out and move around. And you should get out and move around. We shouldn't be just sat there, stuck to the screen in front of us.
It's about 3 times as much carbon per seat if you turn left compared to turning right. And it's also extremely unfair because not that many people in our businesses actually do fly around the world, but those who do contribute a massive proportion of our agency businesses' total footprints. And maybe a stricter policy which applied to everybody would be a fair and equitable way to approach this.
Just to add as well, it's worth looking at some of the airlines which have newer fleets, and the ones which have newer fleets tend to have more efficient, more fuel efficient, and have lower carbon emissions. So it's not a great idea to go for legacy airlines which have a very, very old fleet that needs modernizing.
Excellent, thank you. And it makes you think not just about business travel, all travel really, about how to think about your choices. And we've just got time for one more question, and it's really leading into your hunger for data, James. How long does it take to submit data, and how much expertise does it need?
Konrad has designed a system which, as far as I can understand, and having gone through it, pretending as it were to do it, it is really not difficult. It's getting the data. The submission of the data, frankly, is not difficult, and it is data which almost any consultant or anyone advising a company on what they need to collect and record and report, it's pretty standard stuff on the whole. We've extended it to working from home and commuting because of the nature of our businesses has changed, and that really matters more than it perhaps even used to. But the submission part isn't, frankly, difficult, and I think the system has proved itself.
James is absolutely correct. I mean, the physical act of filling out a form, if you had all the data there, would probably take you no more than 5-10 minutes. The key question is really, and this is the thing with, say, legacy businesses that are not tracking this information this way, you're required to make that investment to go and track this information, which you may not have tracked before. So very simple things which you think, what's your water consumption? It sounds simple, but if you don't have a system in place which measures that, then you're left to creating estimates and things like that. But it's basically looking at your, say, travel expense system to track that granular data, and then making it easier for yourself to then, when it comes to reporting. But the physical act of filling out form, it's not hard. Collecting that information and tracking, that's the hard bit if you don't have those systems in place. And we should actually think about this data, although people may think it's quite a little bit burdensome, but actually use this data to enact business transformation and using it as an excuse to drive transformation within your organization.
You can't manage what you don't measure, to repeat a corny old phrase.
We like a bit of corny.
And we want to show the world that the advertising industry is doing its bit. We want to be able to demonstrate that our companies are making the effort, are making the difference, because again, that enables us to help all those other sorts of companies we work with to help themselves.
Excellent. A real call to action. Konrad, do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, if you've not heard of this particular economic problem called the tragedy of the commons, I do recommend people to look at it, because it really does emphasize the message about collective action, everyone doing their little bit to it, because if we all acted in our self-interest, then that leads to irreparable damage.
Yep. Okay, well, that is a very powerful ending. Thank you so much, Konrad and James from Credo.
Thank you.